to begin, and I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker, Jill Fahlgren. She's a certified coach through the Hudson Institute in Santa Barbara, California. She received her BA from Northwestern and an MBA from Kellogg School of Management. She's an executive coach specializing in leadership development and career management for professionals and executives across industries. She's passionate about helping leaders and teams learn and develop so they can operate at their peak performance, have more impact, and get better results. Jill is a principal with Next Step Partners, a firm committed to helping leaders and their teams step into new challenges, create alignment, and accelerate their results. Now it's my pleasure to turn the presentation over to Jill. So I'm going to make Jill the presenter so we can see her slides.
Thank you, Elaine. And I am pulling up the slides now. And I think you can see it. All right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for that introduction, Elaine, and thank you for this opportunity. I am delighted to be here with all of you tonight, and I'm ready to talk about cultivating resilience. So let me start by telling you a little story. About a year after I moved in with my boyfriend, we decided to move forward with rehabbing the condo that we were living in. And this was a project that he had been thinking about doing before I moved in, and the timing was right to begin. It was going to be a gut rehab, so we couldn't live there while we were doing the work. You can see a picture of the condo here early on in the construction process. So the project was expected to take about 3 months, and since we couldn't live in our place, we decided to sublet an apartment for 4 months. We figured we needed an extra month just to be sure. And I'm guessing that anybody on the call who has done construction, especially a gut rehab, is probably laughing at the idea that we gave ourselves just a month extra. And sure enough, 4 months after we sublet our place, when we had to be moving out, our condo was not finished. The project wasn't even really all that close. So we were scrambling to figure out where we could live because we weren't able to stay in the sublet. And over the course of the next couple months, and yes, I did say couple months, we were able to find a place to stay at a couple of friends. At one point, we were staying in a friend's condo for 3 weeks between the time she moved out and the time that she closed because she was selling the condo. And we lived in this empty place with nothing but a couple of folding chairs and a blow-up bed. We also stayed at a friend's condo who was willing to move in with his girlfriend temporarily so that we could stay there. As you can imagine, during this time, things were getting more and more stressful, both with the condo rehab as well as living in a bunch of places that weren't our homes, being out of our normal schedules, and a lot of uncertainty, frustration, and a lot of unanswered questions as to why things were taking so long. So during this time, I did my best to manage everything as best I could. And what happened is one day after I had some dinner with some friends, I ordered an Uber to get myself home from dinner. And as I was standing outside with my friend waiting for my Uber, I noticed that somebody else had gotten into my Uber and had taken it so that they were no longer coming to pick me up. At that moment, I lost it. And when I say I lost it, I don't mean I lost my phone, and I don't mean I lost my Uber. I mean, I lost it. And I started to cry. And I cried the big, ugly cry. This picture does not do it justice because, of course, it's a cute little baby, and there are not nearly enough tears for what I was crying, standing on the sidewalk, sobbing into my friend's shoulder as she was forced to help me sort out my Uber issue and try to get me home. And we both knew, she knew at the time that this was not about an Uber. I was certainly capable of handling that under normal circumstances. But what had happened is I had let the pressure and stress of my situation get the best of me. And I realized at that point that I was not demonstrating resilience very well. And while it wasn't at that moment on the sidewalk that was the turning point, shortly thereafter, that was a turning point for me. And once I had that realization, I was able to take a step back from my situation and start to take some steps to get myself back into a condition where I could better handle the situation. There is a positive end to the story, and I am living in a beautiful rehabbed condo, but I'll get back to that a little bit later. What I want to do is get back to talking about cultivating resilience. These are our objectives for today's webinar, and I won't read them to you, but I will tell you that we are going to identify one factor that helps set the foundation for cultivating resilience. I'll talk about 3 ways to cultivate resilience, and as part of that, I'll explain each one, and I'll identify specific actions that you can take to help build and work on that particular factor. This will allow you to be better prepared when you need resilience and can also provide some ways to handle things when you're in the midst of a setback. In addition, we will have some time for Q&A at the end of our session. Setbacks, failures, and challenges are going to happen. How you handle them is uncertain. Whether this defines you and holds you back, or you use it to propel you forward. If I were to ask for a show of hands, who has faced a challenge that required resilience, I would likely see all of your hands raised. If I ask you to recall right now a time in your life when you had to demonstrate resilience, I'd like to ask you, how well did you demonstrate resilience at that time? Clearly, as I mentioned in my situation, I was not demonstrating resilience. I'd like to ask you to share in the chat box, thinking back to that time when you had to demonstrate resilience, what did that look like? What did that feel like for you? And I'm watching the chat box to see if you guys are sharing any of your experiences. I'm guessing that if you haven't had a chance to put your responses in the chat box yet, that you probably were finding situations. I see somebody is talking about a vacation and losing their job, returning from a vacation. Wow, yes, that certainly is a situation that would require resilience. Relocating countries, unemployment, yes, a lot of difficult challenges that we face in our lives. I'm hoping that more of you can relate to handling resilience well than relating to what my story was.
We have one more. Having an accident while away from home and family.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's really stressful, and I see parents' deaths as well. Thank you guys. Thank you guys for sharing that. What I'm sharing here is a definition of resilience, and this is from the dictionary. And the second definition here, an ability to recover from or adjust easily to misfortune or change, is pretty much what we're here to talk about tonight. Although I hope you'll take a look at the first definition, because I like including that one, because there's something about the idea of recovering your size and shape after deformation caused by especially compressive stress that I think is really kind of a descriptive way to think about what you might be feeling in a situation where you might need some resistance. So I just like the sound of that as something that I think resonates with me anyway in terms of how I feel in those terrible times. So some people are more naturally resilient than others. Have you noticed that? Sometimes the same person seems to be more or less resilient in different situations. I know for me, I've had other situations in my life that were setbacks or times where I felt like I failed, and I certainly was able to demonstrate more resilience than I did during my condo situation. By the way, why should we talk about resilience? Improving your ability to rebound from setbacks allows you to empathize with others, be better leaders, and take our careers to new heights, live happier lives. Resilience really does matter. The good news is there are things that you can do to build your resilience. First, let's start with a key concept. This can inform how you approach cultivating resilience and set the foundation for doing so. Some of you may have heard of technical and adaptive change. One approach to solving problems is to think them through and identify an action plan to address them. We might focus on what information or skills we have or need to learn to solve the problem. This is a technical change approach, adding skills or information to your current way of thinking. An adaptive change is transforming or expanding your way of thinking about yourself and about the world. It involves shifting your mindset and the beliefs or assumptions you have about the problem or situation. Sometimes it means unlearning. For example, perhaps you know somebody that doesn't really like networking. Maybe they think that it's cheesy. Maybe they think that they feel needy if they ask somebody for something. Maybe they feel like they want to do everything alone and they don't need help from other people. Somebody like this could easily go to a training course or a seminar and learn skills for networking. They might learn things like how to deliver your business card, how to introduce yourself in a conversation, maybe even get tips on where to go to do networking, or how to shake hands properly with somebody that you meet. All of these things are technical skills, and certainly attending a training like this might leave somebody better prepared to go to be successful in networking. However, adaptive change will really be needed to get them out of their own way. That means they'll need to look at their perceptions and beliefs about networking and look at those beliefs as to whether they think it's cheesy or they feel needy when doing that. Without addressing those kinds of things, they're probably not really going to get the benefit and really be able to become a better networker in the way that will be more meaningful to them. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about technical change, and also we're going to be talking about adaptive change, shifting our perception of ourselves, our situations, and our worldview. So with that in mind, let's look at a few key ways that you can cultivate resistance. The first is mindset. When we're struggling with a challenge or setback, it can help to look at what we believe about the situation. How might your thoughts and beliefs impact how you respond and what you do? I worked with a client who was a very successful leader. He had an MBA, he had a lot of accomplishments in his career. By all accounts, he was very successful and had a very impressive resume. He took a job where he was leading an organization, and the organization had a board of directors. So his role as the leader was to execute on the board of directors' vision. That meant the board would set the strategy, and he was the one responsible for implementing it. Over time, there were some conflicts and some differences between he and the board, where he felt that he wanted to do things a little differently and didn't always agree with what the board wanted to do. In time, the board lost confidence in him and his ability to execute what they wanted to be done, and they fired him. As a response, when this happened to him, he really lost his confidence. He believed his career was over. He thought no one would hire him. He struggled to move forward. What were his beliefs? He believed that he failed, that he was a failure. He thought he wasn't capable and didn't believe that he could overcome this. He thought he was not good enough. In other words, it was all about him. This experience defined him and his competence, intelligence, and ability. How do you recover from something like that? You may have heard of Carol Dweck, a Stanford psychologist. She wrote this book called Mindset. In it, she compares and contrasts what she calls fixed and growth mindsets. Have any of you read this book? I'd love it if you'd share in the chat box if you have. In the book, one of the examples she talked about was she did some research where she gave a group of kindergarten students a questionnaire to determine which ones were predisposed to a fixed mindset and which were predisposed to a growth mindset. Once she determined that, she gave all of the kindergarten children an easy math problem to do. It was easy and all of the students got the problem correct. Then she went back to them and she offered them the opportunity to do a harder math problem. In this case, the fixed mindset kids looked at that and said, no, they didn't think they wanted to do another problem. They were good. They'd done one and that was enough. They'd proven themselves. The growth mindset kids, on the other hand, were pretty enthusiastic about saying, yeah, sure, I'll do the problem. Why not? They didn't care about being right or wrong or whether they got the problem right or wrong. They were just interested in taking on the challenge and doing the problems and seeing what they could accomplish. As she gave increasingly more difficult math problems, the growth mindset kids continued to say yes. When you have a fixed mindset, you have a need to prove yourself, to avoid failure, to hide your deficiencies. You see your intelligence as fixed. Failure defines you. It indicates how good or smart you are. And if you think your intelligence and ability can't be developed, where do you go from there? This can directly impact your willingness to take risks and try new things. Can you imagine how it might impact your resilience? Contrast that with a growth mindset. Growth mindset people believe they can develop, grow, and become smarter. Failure is an event, something that happens to them. It doesn't define them. They can see a tie between the work they do and the outcome they achieve and the success they see. They're able to learn and do different things differently in the future. The keys to growth mindset are curiosity, focus on learning, and they don't see their abilities as fixed. So if we go back to my client who got fired from the board, when he was able to shift to a growth mindset, he was able to work to accept what happened to him and learn from it. He began to see the experience as a challenge and not a threat. That made all the difference in the world, and that allowed him to finally take action and steps to move forward in his career. So what I'd like to do is walk you through a few actions that you might be able to take to work on developing your mindset as part of your efforts to cultivate resilience. First and foremost, I suggest reading the book Mindset by Carol Dweck if you haven't already done so. And if you have, you may wish to revisit it. Notice in your life, notice in your daily experiences where you're demonstrating a fixed versus a growth mindset. Awareness is always the first step. Once you identify places where you might be adopting more of a fixed mindset, think about moving towards adopting a growth mindset. If you have a growth mindset, you recognize that this is a skill that you can learn, and a great way to learn it is through practice. Try challenging your beliefs. I mentioned some of the beliefs of my client. He believed he was a failure. He believed that no one was going to hire him. Notice what you're believing and when those beliefs might be holding you back. Particularly, you might want to notice when you have all or nothing beliefs. In my client's case, no one will hire me. My life is over. I'll never be able to do anything. All of these are extreme beliefs and ripe for the opportunity to be challenged. A great way to challenge your beliefs is try doing some what ifs. For my client, he might have said things like, what if someone will hire me? What if I can get a job? What if I can learn and do better next time? You also want to work on your perception of the experience and the situation that you're dealing with, and see if you can shift that perception from it being a threat to a challenge. Certainly, a lot of the challenges that you all have identified that you faced are very challenging and very strenuous, and I'm not suggesting that this type of perception shift is easy. However, especially when you get into situations where you're feeling things like failure and things that are feeling like a threat to your advancement or to your future, that trying to shift to the challenge can be helpful. This last one is a little bit different than some of the others. Spend time on something you do well. And the idea behind this is when you're doing something well, it can be very energizing. It can shift your energy and your feeling to a positive swing. And so think about, especially if you're feeling stressed or challenged, if you give yourself a chance to do something that you do well, it can both bring you joy, energy, and positivity, which can be a nice way to help shift your perspective and put you in the mindset where you can look at your situation perhaps in a little different way. So the second factor in thinking about how you might cultivate resilience is self-management. One of the best things we can do when we experience a challenge or setback is to stop and reflect on what happened, learn from it, and figure out how we can use that to move forward. And what if we don't do that? I know a woman named Kathy who got her dream job. She was hired by a top-tier organization to build out a whole new function. This was a huge opportunity for her. She was going to have great impact, build a team, and she was excited because she was going to be able to work with people she knew and liked. This was a wonderful opportunity. Unfortunately, a few months into her experience, there was a shakeup in the organization. A lot of the leadership shifted. Some left, and some moved to other parts of the company. At that point, she lost her leadership support, both for herself as an employee as well as for the project that she was working on. She ended up in a role with different expectations, and it was a role she didn't want. She stuck it out and gave it her best and kept trying to make it work, but ultimately she realized that it just wasn't going well, and ultimately she left the company. She left feeling betrayed, disappointed, hurt, and exhausted. So what do you think she did? She jumped into her next opportunity as quickly as possible. She was worried and she felt like she needed to get a job soon because she didn't want this to impact her negatively. At the same time, she got stuck. She couldn't let it go. She felt angry and thought about what happened all the time. She talked about it. She obsessed about it. She couldn't let it go, and as a result, her career suffered. When we experience a challenge or setback, we can get stuck. We can get locked into the negatives. What went wrong? What did we do? What should we have done? What should we not have done? What do we fear about the ramifications or what might happen as a result? Our focus on the past and worry about the future can really keep us from moving forward. Epictetus was a Greek philosopher who believed that all external events are beyond our control. We should accept calmly and dispassionately whatever happens. However, he believed, individuals are responsible for their own actions, which they can examine and control through rigorous self-discipline. One thing that can stand in the way of our accepting what happens is a key cause of stress, which is rumination. Dr. Derek Roger is a clinical psychologist turned neuroscientist and leading expert on resilience and stress management. Through his research, he identifies rumination as the mental process of thinking over and over about something that happened either in the past or something that could happen in the future, and attaching negative emotion to it. Does anybody else relate to this? Because I sure do. I can tell you, when I was in the midst of my condo challenges, I was ruminating a lot about how upset I was about my situation, how unhappy I was, and all of the stress and things that were going on. So I mentioned that reflecting and learning is a great way to start exhibiting resilience. There's a difference between reflection and rumination, which is shown here in this graph. Essentially, the bottom part of this graph is rumination, and you can see how you can get stuck in the negatives, either looking at the past and focusing on regrets and disappointments and frustrations, or you can be focusing on the future, worrying about what might happen, being anxious about what could be. And what can happen is you can get in this cycle where your thoughts just keep spinning and spinning in this negative place. Unfortunately, there's no benefit to rumination. So how do you shift from the negative to the positive, to the upper part of this graph, the reflection piece? The good news is that there are some skills you can do that with repetition and practice can become more habitual for you and become easier. The first one is to be present, to focus on this moment in time. One way to do that is to get in touch with your senses. You can't really be in touch with your senses unless you're in the present moment. That means thinking about what you see, feel, hear, and taste and smell in the moment. Getting yourself into the present allows you to get away from the constant stream of thoughts, especially the negative thoughts that can be distracting. Being present and being focused in the current moment is also a way that you can get to flow. If you're familiar with the concept of flow, flow is that point in time when you're so focused and engaged on what you're doing in the present moment that time seems to pass by. It's a very positive, very energizing state that can happen sometimes with specific activities. And what those activities are really depends upon you and what your interests are and what aligns well with you. Some common activities where flow might happen might be sports, running, downhill skiing, things like building something, or even gardening. So I definitely encourage you to think about noticing what flow activities you might have and think about using those type of activities to help you get into the positive, into the present moment and help you shift into the positive side of this graph. Once you're present, once you're in the moment, you can think about controlling your attention. Controlling your attention starts with maybe slowing down a little bit and noticing what your thoughts are and noticing where your attention is. Oftentimes what happens, you might have this happen to you when you're doing something and all of a sudden you realize you're 3 or 4 thoughts down the road and you're not even sure how you got there. Or you've been watching TV, but all of a sudden you realize you don't know what just happened in the show because you've started thinking about something else. So if you can slow yourself down and notice that you've lost your attention, practice moving your attention back to where you want it to be and holding it there. Come back to that present moment. A way to keep yourself there is to, again, notice what senses you can experience, what you see, what you hear, what you feel. Some mindfulness practices are focused on helping you control your attention. Specifically, meditation is one. And I did a meditation experience once, and I remember what the person said was, think of your thoughts as being like a little puppy that you're training. And I love this because I love the visual of the little puppy. And when you're training a little puppy, what happens is when the puppy runs away and you want to gently bring the puppy back to where you want the puppy to be. You're not going to get upset at the puppy. You're not going to get frustrated. You're going to be very kind and gentle with the puppy and just gently bring the puppy back. And that's the same approach you want to take with your thoughts and with your attention. So when your attention strays, try not to get frustrated or annoyed. Just notice it and then bring it back to where you want it to be. The next skill is detaching. And this is really important for when you get caught up in that rumination and get caught up in that negative cycle. When you detach, what you do is you distance yourself from the situation. You look at that situation as something that happened, not as something that defined you. And two things that can be helpful in detaching. The first is maintaining perspective. So looking at the situation as objectively as you can, and trying to maintain perspective about what happened. The second thing that you can do is to focus on what you can control. And this is a big one. I know this is something that was really important for me during my condo experience, was when I started to detach from the things that I could not control, it freed up my energy and freed up my attention to be able to look at the things that I could control. The last thing, and by the way, I'm not suggesting that this is necessarily easy, but remember, these are skills and these are things for you to practice over time. The last thing is letting go. Letting go of what happened, letting go of what you can't control. A key question to ask to help yourself let go is, what will continuing to focus on this help? And certainly when I was in my condo experience and I was focusing on my frustration that the contractors weren't getting things done, and I didn't have control over what things were happening, by allowing myself to detach from that and recognizing that my focusing on that wasn't accomplishing anything other than hurting me, it again allowed me that opportunity to, despite all my frustration and anger, to let go and move forward. And so when I think to my friend Kathy and her situation and how she was holding herself back in her career by focusing on all the negatives of what happened in that situation, it was really helpful for her to get to the point where she could detach and let it go. There wasn't anything she could do about the way she was treated or about the circumstances that happened. And by focusing on that, what she was not doing was allowing herself to learn from the experience and take what she could and move forward. And so when we look at this graph and look at the positive side on the reflection piece, what we want to do is, we're also not going to be spinning in some kind of positive world where we're just pretending that none of the negative things happened by any means. But what we want to do is, if we can get ourselves grounded in the present moment, then we can reflect on the past and reflect on what happened objectively, look for the learning that we can take from it, and use that learning to help ourselves move forward. And then when we think about the future, instead of worrying and having anxiety, we're able to plan to take action to achieve the desired future that we want. So let's talk about some actions that we can take to help us work on our self-management. The first is, again, noticing. Notice how often and when you're ruminating. And I don't know if anybody here has any trouble sleeping at night, but I know myself, I wake up a couple times at night sometimes, and when my mind starts to get into rumination, it can be a big problem and it can keep me from sleeping. So I definitely am practicing the art of noticing when I'm ruminating. And when I do notice that, then I work to replace rumination with reflection. I work to do a couple things: to control my thoughts so that I get out of that cycle of spinning. I work to take myself out of that negative focus towards the positive focus. Practice reflecting, learning, and moving forward. So if you're able to get to that reflection point, get yourself present, reflect on what happened, take your learnings, and move yourself forward. Strengthen your emotional consciousness. What do I mean by that? Emotional consciousness is your ability to recognize and name your emotions. By doing that, it does a couple of things for you. Naming your emotions triggers rational thought. It triggers a different part of your brain that takes you out of the emotional sphere and into the rational side. What that does is that gives you the opportunity, it gives you the space to choose to decide how you want to respond. It allows you to work through and manage your emotions instead of being managed by them. Naming also allows you to understand the cause and effect. Sometimes what happens, if we can get so caught up in emotion that we're not even really aware of what's at the core of the emotion, or really getting clear on what emotions we're feeling. Sometimes we can just default to, oh, I'm angry, I'm upset. And it's very high level. And sometimes if you can give yourself the opportunity to take a closer look at that emotion and understand what's causing it, then you can decide how you want to go about managing it and working through that emotion. Incorporate mindfulness practices. I'd love if anybody has some ideas or some experiences with mindfulness practices and what works for you. If you'd like to share that in the chat, share that for myself and for others. I mentioned meditation, yoga. There are a lot of practices that people use to help you take care of your thought process and allow you to better control your thoughts and your where your attention is going.
Virginia said walking.
Yes, walking. Walking could be a flow activity. Walking, definitely a mindful practice. Terrific. Thank you for sharing that. I love it. I live in the city, so that explains partly my condo my condo experience, and also the fact that I don't probably do as many nature walks as other people do.
We have another answer, mindful eating.
Mindful eating is wonderful for your physical health as well.
And
I
Danielle uses an insight timer app for a wide variety of meditation teachings.
Awesome. That's a wonderful tip. Thank you, Danielle. And I saw somebody else mention self-hypnotism for relaxing. I think that's a beautiful thing, and I think that's maybe something I need to look into for my sleep challenges. Thank you guys so much. And I think this is the last one here. Engage in flow activities. So I mentioned, I think things like walking and running and things like that can be flow activities, but I do encourage you to consider, if you can identify what those things might be, that to think about engaging in those as a way to energize yourself and put you into that positive space. I forgot, I do have one more self-management action here, and that is get a theme song. And last year, I saw Wendy Borlabi, who is a performance coach for the Chicago Bulls and a sports psychologist. I saw her speak at a convention, and she was talking about some challenging times that she went through. And one of the things she recommended was getting a theme song. And I love this idea. When I was going through my condo experience, I found a very short poem that I loved, that when I thought of that poem, it just shifted me into a different space and shifted me into a more positive space. And so in stressful times, I would recite that poem in my head. And that was a real difference maker for me, to help me to jar myself out of stressful, upsetting times. And the theme song idea is a similar idea, where if you have a theme song, you can use it to motivate you, to shift your energy. I would love to hear if anybody wants to share some ideas for if you already have a theme song in the chat. And otherwise, if you have some ideas for what might be a good one. I have a couple of ideas here for you. One is, if you know the song Happy by Pharrell Williams. I will save you my singing because I don't have a beautiful singing voice, but I have to say it's hard for me to hear that song and not feel happy, though I could imagine some people might feel a little, it might be a little annoying for some. Another song, I Will Survive, depending on your circumstances, I Will Survive by Gloria Gaynor. And the theme song from Rocky is a pretty well-known song, and these are some songs that I've heard other people use for their theme songs. And by the way, you might have different theme songs for different situations. Elaine, are there other suggestions in the chat box?
No, I'm not seeing any. Oh, here's one. Lizzo. I do my hair toss, check my nails.
Awesome. Awesome. And I see a fight song and I see a playlist of upbeat songs. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I love it. Excellent. Thank you, guys. All right. Oh, and I wanted to share this. Eckhart Tolle is a big present moment person, a big mindfulness, and I love this idea of acceptance. And it's along the lines of what Epictetus said as well. And accepting the moment is not always an easy thing to do, but certainly something that can help cultivate resilience. All right, so our third and final way to help build resilience is self-care. And what I have here is the high performance pyramid, which was developed by management theorists Jim Loehr and Tony Schwartz. And they wrote about it in their article, The Making of a Corporate Athlete, which was published in the Harvard Business Review, as well as some other publications as well. And they were looking at the ability for people to, especially professionals, to have sustained high performance. And there's a few main ideas that I think are really relevant for our resilience and cultivating resilience. So one of them is that in order to look at high performance and the ability to be resilient, is you really need to look at the whole person rather than just looking at one individual thing. So we've been talking tonight about various different actions and things to look at. When you think about being in shape and being positioned to be effective and be resilient, you really do want to look at more than just one level. So what they're showing here is the link between mind and body. And we operate at our best when all four levels are working well together. And our ability to navigate difficult situations and failure is directly tied to our physical capacity. You'll notice physical capacity is the bottom foundation of this pyramid. And that means both taking care of ourselves when we're faced with a challenge and also taking care of ourselves in general so that we're stronger if and when something occurs. And physical is the foundation. It's the source of our energy. And when they're talking about physical capacity, it's not just working out, though working out is important. It's really all aspects of physical health. So things like getting good sleep, eating well, keeping habits and a regular schedule. All of these things can contribute to your physical capacity. And strengthening your physical capacity promotes your mental and emotional recovery. And so what happens is the stronger we are and the healthier we are, the more well-prepared we are, the more ability we have to be able to manage our internal selves and to manage our emotions and to manage the feelings that are coming up. So again, what we want to be able to do is be able to manage our emotions and work through things rather than be managed by them. Having our emotional capacity strengthened gives us the ability to be able to build our mental capacity, which is a source for motivation, determination, and endurance. So if we're able to better manage our emotions, we're in a better position to be able to manage our thoughts and our thinking and our mindset. And so all of these individual things build on each other. So if one gets out of whack, then it becomes harder for the rest to stay in balance. So when we think about our self-care regimen, we want to think about self-care that aligns with all of these different areas. And by the way, the top of the pyramid is spiritual capacity. And what they're really talking about there is sense of value and purpose, values and purpose. So it's really about being grounded and having a purpose and feeling like there's a deeper reason why you're doing what you're doing and you're here and you're being. So when I was in my condo situation, for example, what I realized was I was way out of my routine. I wasn't working out. I was eating out all the time. I wasn't being healthy. And that shook my physical capacity. That really shook my foundation so that all of the rest of these things ended up getting out of whack. And for me, I had a lot of work to do because I was really working on kind of all of these levels. Hopefully what you might be able to do is notice when one or the other gets out of balance and recognize that it can be helpful to take some steps to get things in balance so that you're better able to operate as a whole and better able to respond to situations effectively. So let's talk about a couple of actions to take for your self-care. So first of all, create a practice of self-care if you don't have one, and take a look at it if you do. Think about the 4 different levels of the pyramid and make sure that you're addressing all of them. Develop positive habits. So habits that allow you to be consistent with your practice of self-care, and habits that allow you to stay positive as well. Help you stay on the top of that graph, that in the reflection zone versus the rumination zone. Notice when you have imbalances in the performance pyramid and adjust. Journal. This is a pretty tactical one. In my experience, and with myself as well as people I know who are regular journalers, journaling can be a really great way to connect with a lot of these different areas. And from a self-care perspective, it can certainly help you with emotional management, mental capacity, and can help you even express some of the negatives you might be feeling to help you get out of the rumination cycle. Might help you on the positive side as well. So consider a journaling practice as a way to stay connected and to promote your self-care. Create a support system and find inspiration. So when I was talking about my networking example, I was talking about how sometimes people feel like they need to or want to go it all on their own. And some people sometimes feel that there's a sense of pride in doing everything on their own, which is great. But what the authors found is that actually having a support system is really valuable and is a big difference maker in helping people cultivate resilience and helping them demonstrate resilience. And so when I think about my experience, you guys may have noticed that I mentioned multiple times in my story about friends who helped me along the way. And that did not go unnoticed for me. I am so grateful for the friendship and the support system that I have. And it definitely made a big difference. And I encourage you to think about making sure that you maintain your support systems so you can be there for other people and they can be there for you as well. And finding inspiration, if you Google resilience, you can find loads of stories about other people who have survived and really survived challenging situations and really demonstrated resilience. And sometimes it can be helpful to find some motivation or inspiration in hearing other people's stories and hearing how they were able to move forward and move past stressful and challenging times. The last 2 things I will suggest for you, one is to reflect on our discussion this evening and think about any takeaways or learnings that you might have. Whether you write something down now or after the webinar ends, even one thing that you can take away that you learned or that would be valuable for you from tonight will be helpful. And the last thing is think about one action. I talked about a lot of different actions that you might take. What's one thing you'll do that you thought of or that we talked about in tonight's webinar? Well, now we've come to the Q&A portion. I want to thank everybody for your time and your attendance tonight. It's been a pleasure for me to be able to be here with you, and I'd love to answer your questions. I'd love to hear your comments. What would you like to share that would be helpful for the group?
Well, I'm not seeing anyone so far, so I will share when I put in that I lost my job after having worked at a place for 6 years, coming back from a vacation.
Mm.
And it was a case of where I was working with the new venture and working with the president. And basically, she decided that she wanted to work with a different person. So it was difficult to not take it personally because I had succeeded in doing many jobs at that business and I had progressed. And after receiving positive reviews and everything, you definitely take it personally. So it took me a long time to focus on my achievements and rebuild my confidence that would enable me to go forward to the next job and be confident in interviewing that I was okay as an employee. But a lot of the things that you said tonight were the process that I went through. But I did
Elaine,
spend a good bit of time ruminating.
that is it's very difficult not to take that personally. I totally understand that because, in a way it is personal because it happened to you, right?
Right. And it wasn't something you could specifically identify. I kept asking myself, well, what could I have done differently? What did I do wrong? All of those voices in your head. But I saw a recent quote that said, you need to tell all the voices in your head that you are the boss. And eventually I got to that point. But it did take
I
me a
love
little
that.
time.
Was there anything in particular you found helpful?
Well, I think it was mainly focusing on all the various skills that I had demonstrated up to that point. And,
Yeah.
It was really just a personality matter. So
Absolutely.
not
Well, yeah, that's a
everybody
really
is,
difficult.
yeah, it really wasn't. Eventually, I came to the realization that it wasn't my fault. It was just not the right people together at the right time. And the president was very concerned about this new venture. So she felt she wanted maybe a more aggressive person. I don't know. But it's a very nebulous thing, but it certainly damaged your confidence. And it took some work to move forward, reflection and deliberate steps forward, like your action steps.
Yep. And I like that, taking steps to build your confidence back up, doing things that you're good at. And you're right. I mean, this is very much a step-by-step thing. It's not like I'm going to turn on resilience and suddenly everything's perfect. I do want to make that clear that I'm not suggesting that this is easy, and it is very much a one step at a time. And I really like the visual of the little puppy. If you're a puppy person, the idea that, being kind and gentle with yourself and having patience.
Right. Kathleen comments on the self-care high performance pyramid. She likes that because it reminds her of how important the physical self-care is, especially when you are mentally or emotionally drained.
Thank you, Kathleen. Yeah, it's easy to forget you get focused on one thing, and it's easy to overlook some of the others and how everything really relates.
Jill, I have a question. What advice would you give to parents of girls how to increase resilience in their daughters? Parents of schoolgirls.
And how are you, what are you seeing?
Well, because girls lose confidence when they're so young. They lose confidence in their ability, even before they get into middle school. And I think part of this is that they lose resilience, don't they?
I think there are a lot of things going on there. But yes, I think probably what happens is they are starting to believe what they're told, right? They're getting feedback on things that are probably making them feel that they're, feeling somehow bad. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, it's to do with this growth mindset thing, isn't it?
Exactly what I was going to say is I think that would be a good place. If you haven't read that book, I definitely encourage reading that book, because it's an interesting, looking at that idea of, that you can develop, you can learn, you can grow, and be able to not be defined by, whatever is happening, and it's very hard. It's very hard, I think, when you're getting messages, messages that you are getting may actually be counterproductive. And so for me, for example, what really resonated for me in the book was that I was one of those students that people told me I was smart because I got good grades. And so I was always told I was smart. And instead of that being, that didn't convert me into a growth mindset, that converted me into a fixed mindset person, because I was afraid of doing something that would make it look like I wasn't smart. And so instead of people saying like, oh, you're working so hard to get good grades, you're learning so much, it was you're smart, which made me think that it was predefined. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm not suggesting that was conscious, but so I do think the mindset book might be helpful because it might give you some ideas about what you can notice might be going on, and helping thinking about what messages you give the children, as well as how do you help them respond to messages they might be getting from other places.
Thank you.
The other thing that I think with the helicopter parenting style, some parents are preventing children from learning from mistakes and building resilience in small steps as they're growing up. Letting them have small failures is okay, and that's the way you build your confidence in yourself. And talking about how you succeeded in small endeavors as a child hopefully will help you counter that careless comment from peers about, that you're not pretty or that you're not smart or whatever it is. The peer pressure and the peer replies become so important that the child almost needs like a Under Armour or something. They need that building of skills and confidence in things they can do in order to counteract some of the thoughtless comments perhaps during teenage years that damage your self-confidence.
I definitely agree with you, Elaine. And I think, like you said, focusing on things that they do well. And so I'm not a parent, so I'm probably not the best person to address that question. But I will say from my own personal experience as a former child that, it's hard. One thing you learn as you get older is that, that's not the end of the world. Like what's happening in schools is such it's things will get better as you get older. But the problem, I think, these days is that with things like bullying and everything is so magnified with social media and with the way, people communicate and interact, that I think it's a big challenge, frankly. I think it's a big challenge.
Absolutely. Well, it is past 9 o'clock, and we thank everyone for joining us. Jill, do you want to switch back to me as presenter?
Oh, yes, of course.
And we thank you for your time and your presentation. We've certainly gained insights and things that we could do to become more resilient.
Thank you very much.